Well, hello and welcome to Will Henry's Gunsmith and Workshop. I am Will Henry. Today I've got this barrel that I'm going to have to set back and rechamber, and in this particular case it has to be set back and rechambered because the headspace is a little excessive. This is a barrel from a Berno ZKK 600. That'd be a ZKK 600 if you live south of the 49th. But in any case, so the headspace is a little excessive on this, and it'll have to be set back and rechambered in order to correct that. And I thought this might be a good time to maybe delve into the whole question of headspace and what it is, how it's measured, how it's measured with various cases and so on. So in general, the headspace measurement is the measurement from the face of the breech or bolt face to a predetermined point on the in the chamber or on the cartridge. In the case of a rimless case, like the 9.3 by 62 here, that measurement is from the bolt face to a point on the shoulder of a given diameter. In this case, the diameter is 0.4 of an inch, or 0.400. And so at the point at which this case measures 0.400, that's called the datum line, and it's the distance from the face or the base of the cartridge, and if you're talking about the cartridge, to the datum line. And that's the case with all rimless cartridges. They're always measured to a datum line. Anytime you're measuring to a point on a cone, you go to a datum line so that you can have consistent measurement. And but with each rimless cartridge, they may use a different datum. For instance, the 30-06 uses a datum line of where the shoulder is 0.375 in diameter. And that's all just related to the shape and size of the case. In the case of a belted cartridge, the datum is the front of the belt or the front of the belt recess cut in the chamber. And so here's a belted case. This is a 308 Norma Magnum. And now your nominal headspace measurement for a belted case is 0.220. And that's your minimum chamber dimension to the front of the belt recess from the bolt face would be 0.220. Now, one would expect the distance to the belt to be somewhere near that, and it is, and always somewhat less. It's in this case, it's 0.216. So on this rifle, if the chamber is cut to 0.220, then with the belt being 216, there's a clearance of 0.004 of an inch. Now, that clearance, which is the distance between the face of the bolt and the base of the cartridge when it's pushed all the way into the chamber, that's referred to as head clearance. Now, a lot of people will refer to that as head space because it makes sense that you would, and for the most part, it doesn't matter. Doesn't bother me. Everybody knows what you're talking about, and so a person will say that on the cartridge that rifle has 0.004 of head space, but the reality is the head space measurement on the rifle is exactly correct at 0.220, and so that properly speaking, what you have on your case is 0.004 head clearance. With back to the rimless case, here's the headspace gauge for that 9.3 by 62. And again, when they made this gauge, they measured it so that the distance from the base of the gauge to the datum line, that point, which is 0.400 in diameter, is I think it's 0.21197 for this particular cartridge, and so they cut this shoulder angle precisely at what it's supposed to be, and I'd have to look to tell you what that is. So as long as this angle and the commensurate angle on the reamer are exactly the same, this gauge would give you a very precise measurement of your chamber length. And if there's a variance between those two angles, the angle on the gauge and the angle on the reamer, then the contact point will be somewhere other than at the datum line, depending on which way those diverge. And so you would get a reading that wasn't necessarily precise, but it's not going to be bad because they're not going to be off by a full degree or anything like that. And so for all intents and purposes, it's just fine. But because of that potential for variance, that's one reason that some people will say that you should buy gauges and reamers from the same maker because they're more likely to be the same. But the truth is, all of your tool makers and gauge makers, they work to pretty stringent measurements. So they're all going to be very, very close. And this particular gauge comes from Pacific Tool and Gauge, and as it happens, that's where the reamer comes from as well. So we're super good there. Now, rimmed cartridges are much like belted cartridges in that they headspace on the rim, and so their datum line is the distance from the face of the breech to the front of the rim recess or the back of the barrel, depending on how that particular firearm is set up. And the nominal headspace measurement for most of your rim cartridges is 0.063 or 0.064, something like that. And for the 4570, for instance, an older cartridge, that headspace measurement is 0.070. And here's a gauge for a rimmed cartridge, and so the thickness of the rim on this gauge is 0.064, and that gauge comes from Will Henry's workshop. So there you go. A person, when you're chambering for a rimmed cartridge, you can either use a gauge or you can measure directly to the front of the rim recess with your depth mic. Either way works. The fourth cartridge, and I'll just mention it in passing, would be the semi-rimmed cartridges. And a semi-rimmed cartridge is a cartridge that has a rim that's a little larger than body diameter, but the rim is only there for extraction purposes, and those cartridges headspace at the shoulder at a datum line, just like a rimless cartridge. So they're treated the same way. So anyway, this particular barrel, chambered for the 9.3 by 62, shows about 12 thousandths of an inch of headspace on the gauge, and this would be what you would call the absolute maximum that should be allowed, and it's really more than a person wants. In general, we all, and I say we, speaking for other gunsmiths, we all try to chamber to minimum chamber dimensions, and that's usually enough that any cartridge is going to fit, but nothing's going to be sloppy. You get good brass life and so on. Now, surprisingly enough, one would expect that the minimum chamber dimension and the maximum cartridge dimension would be the same, or very close to the same. But surprisingly enough, according to SAMI, the Sporting Arms and Ammunition Manufacturers Institute, or I believe that's what it stands for. Anyway, according to them, the maximum cartridge for the 30-06, for instance, is over 2/1000ths of an inch longer in headspace than the minimum chamber. So that if you happen to have a maximum cartridge and a minimum chamber, there's going to actually be an interference fit there, and you're going to have a little difficulty getting the bolt closed. I've never seen a maximum case, I don't think, although I've seen some that have been very close, and to where in a rifle that was that had a gauged minimum chamber, the factory cartridge closed with a definite feel on the bolt. So that was a cartridge that was definitely approaching maximum. But anyway, in general, as long as you chamber to a minimum, to the SAMI minimum, your cartridges are going to fit, and so that's kind of what we aim for. In this case, like I say, that went a little too far, so we're going to set it back and recut the chamber so it'll be right. This now on this rifle, the thread pitch is 2 millimeters, so that's about 0.078 something, I think, and so I'll have to go back, set it back 0.078 or slightly less in order to get it to go back a full turn, so the sights are up on top again, and then chambered from there. But anyway, that's kind of it. I don't think I've left anything out as far as headspace is concerned. Before I even started, and then I didn't reach for it, but I drew this handy drawing, and you can believe it or not, but that's drawn freehand, and it shows there the 400 datum line, and there's the breech and the dimension. But I think we got by okay without that, and I've hopefully I've made everything clear and haven't muddied the waters too much in general. So just to recap, headspace is a measurement from the bolt face to the datum line on the shoulder. On a rimless case, the front of the belt on a belted case, or the belt recess, if we're talking about the rifle, and the front of the rim on a rimmed case. And so that's it. Head clearance is the distance between the bolt face and the back of the cartridge when it's pushed all the way into the chamber. And head clearance, ideally, you want it to be 0, but it's really probably just fine anywhere up to about 2/1000ths of an inch. If you have more than 2/1000ths of an inch of head clearance, you're going to have poor brass life, and so you don't want that. And that's why with a belted cartridge, after the first firing, where you necessarily have probably around 5/1000ths, 4 or 5/1000ths of head clearance, after that you will headspace. There's the term headspace used as a verb. You'll headspace on the shoulder just as if it were a rimless cartridge, so that you can reduce the head clearance and get better brass life. The same thing applies to a rimmed cartridge, although most rim cartridges, the tolerance is much closer than on the belted cartridges for some reason. For instance, this 303 British, a piece of Winchester brass, measures .06062, and so that's within 1,000th of an inch of a minimum chamber, or 2,000ths of an inch, pardon me, of a minimum chamber, which measured .064. And so you can see in that case, if you had much dirt ahead of that cartridge or anything, again, you're going to get some interference. And with a rimmed cartridge, you don't dare have an interference fit with clean surfaces, because you just plain wouldn't be able to close the bolt. That brass doesn't compress very well. So anyway, that's it. Now I promise I'm finished. So thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next time. And this is Will Henry.